Hi, I'm Mark. In this video, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks you can use to paint a room inside your home. Now, I'm by no means a professional painter, but I've done a lot of painting over the years and picked up some things along the way to make it easier. So what I'm going to show you today are some techniques you can use to make your painting easier and faster. We'll get started with talking about preparation. So I'm working on a remodel project in my basement. I'm going to be painting this corner today. We have this ledge we'll need to work around, which I'm not going to be painting the ledge itself, it's in pretty good shape, but I am changing the color of the walls. I've already removed the covers from all of the outlets and the light switch. I've cleaned the walls with some dishwashing detergent and water, and went back and rinsed everything really good to get any soap residue off of the walls. I've removed the baseboard because I'm also putting in a laminate floor as part of this project, so I won't have to worry about that. That makes the painting a little easier. So one of the ways that I make painting faster is I try to mask as little as possible. You can spend an entire day or more masking off an entire basement to get it ready for painting. I'm going to show you some brush techniques so you don't need to do so much of that. However, I do want to mask off the top of this shelf because as I roll, there will be some splatter coming off the roller, and I don't want that to get on the shelf itself. So next I'll go ahead and get that masked. Now, something you're going to hear me say over and over in this video is, you get what you pay for. And the first place that applies is your masking tape. Don't use the cheap off-white stuff. It's just that, cheap. The cheap masking tape uses a really strong adhesive, and you'll have a hard time removing it from your wall. It will leave a residue on the wall when it does come off. And if you're really lucky, it'll pull the paint off the wall as well. You don't want that. So use a good masking tape meant for painters. These tapes have a less strong adhesive, so they remove easily. And a lot of them even have a treatment they put on the edges, so when you remove the tape, it's less likely to pull the paint with it. Also, you'll have less bleed through underneath the tape with one of these good masking tapes. So again, spend a little money here. To mask off the ledge, I'm going to use my good painter's tape and some of this masking paper. You can find this in the painting area of your home center. I'll lay this out on the edge. Cut it a little bit long here. I'll set it back from the wall about 1/2 inch and then use my tape to hold it in place. I'll cut a nice square edge onto my tape. I'll get this right up into the corner. And then put it in a nice straight line along the wall. Another trick that I use here is notice that I'm holding the roll tight against the wall, and that keeps this edge nice and straight. I can cut that off, and now I'll work down this edge. Now let's talk a minute about the tools I use to paint. You're going to need a good paintbrush, a good roller frame, and roller covers. Again, don't try to save a lot of money here, especially on your paintbrush and your roller covers. A good paintbrush will lay down the paint evenly and smoothly. A cheap paintbrush will be just the opposite. So when you're at the home center looking at the vast selection of paintbrushes, spend a little money and buy a good brush. It'll definitely be worth it. The same thing applies to your roller covers. A good roller cover will again put down an even, smooth layer of paint. A cheap roller cover will struggle to do that, and it'll tend to leave fibers from the roller on your wall, and you don't want that. When it comes to the roller frame, this is one spot I don't necessarily buy the most expensive one. What I look for in a roller frame is something that's light, because you're going to be using this a lot, and your arm's going to get tired if you buy a heavy one. And it seems like the more expensive ones will tend to have things like wooden handles, and they'll just weigh more. A lighter one will pay off in a long day of painting. You'll need a paint tray for your roller. Here, you want just a good metal frame, and I like to use these liners. You put one of these into the tray, and then when you're done painting, you just remove it and throw it away. And that keeps you from having to clean the tray. I like to use one of these as well. This is a pail to put your paint in. And again, you can get these liners for it that are disposable. It's difficult to paint directly from the can, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. One of these pails makes it really easy. So these are the tools we'll need to do our painting. Now let's talk about the paint. The overall success of your painting project is going to come down to the quality of paint you buy. So again, buy a good paint. Buying a cheap paint doesn't necessarily mean you're going to save a lot of money. I have a friend who had a buddy at a paint store who gave him a really good deal on a contractor grade paint. The problem was he ended up needing 3 coats to get the coverage on his wall. So in the long run, he didn't save anything and had to do 3 times the work. Now in addition to picking a color, when you pick paint, you'll also need to pick a sheen. And that's how glossy or flat the paint will look on the wall. Now the sheen you pick will be a compromise between the desired look you want and your lifestyle. Flat paints tend to be popular. They look great, but they scuff easily and are hard to clean, where a glossy paint is easy to clean and is more scuff resistant. So if you have a lot of young kids, you may want to lean more towards a semi-gloss or a satin paint. If you have older kids or you're an empty nester, you can probably get away with a flat or an eggshell. I'm using an eggshell paint, which is just 1 notch glossier than a complete flat paint. However, on my trim, I like to use a semi-gloss or even a gloss. Now let's get started with our painting. Before you start painting, you'll want to mix your paint well, and I've already done that. So I'll pour a little bit into my pail now. And I'll use this to start cutting in the corners. The brush I'm using is a 2-inch angled brush. This angle is important for cutting in the corners. I'll show you that in a minute. Like I said, I like to use this pail rather than painting out of a can. And that's important because it allows me to properly load the brush. That's something that a lot of people do wrong when they paint. The way to load your brush is dip it in the paint and get a good generous amount of paint on the brush. And then rather than wiping it off, like a lot of people do, tap the brush on the sides of the bucket. When you wipe it off like this, you remove all the paint from the brush. But by tapping the sides, I remove the excess so the brush won't drip, but I keep a good amount of paint on the brush. And that's what we want. Like I said before, I do as little masking as possible. That's where this angled brush comes in. This is going to allow me to cut in this corner very precisely without masking off the ceiling. I'll show you how I do that. I put the brush right up into the corner. You'll see how I have the angle placed so the long end of the angle is the part that's at the back side of the brush. I put it right up into the corner and keep this edge of the brush right on the line that I want to create. I kind of shake the brush as I go. This distributes the paint a little more evenly. And I'll work about 12 to 10 inches at a time. And right now I'm just concentrating on getting that nice crisp line up on the ceiling. And once the brush starts to run out of paint, I'll go back and blend this in. And smooth it out. Now the part of this that I'm most concerned about is the top 2 inches, because that's the part I'm not going to be able to reach with my roller. So if it doesn't cover perfectly down in this area, it doesn't matter. I just need nice, even coverage up here. And I'll continue this all the way down the wall. Once you get this trick down, you can paint very, very quickly. Now let's talk about another technique, and this may be the most important thing you need to know about painting with a brush. When you paint with a brush, you always want to paint back into the wet paint. Let me show you what I mean. Once I have the paint on the wall and I'm smoothing it out, I always want to go from the unpainted side into the wet paint that I've put up previously. And the reason for that is, if I start on the wet side and go out, it's going to leave a line of paint every time. If I go from the wet side in, it feathers that out and leaves everything nice and smooth. So this is the wrong way, and I'll correct it by painting back into the wet paint. See how that just disappears. Another thing I do is on this bottom edge where the painting stops, I want to make sure I feather that out so I don't have any runs or blobs of paint down in that area. And I use this same technique around all the ceiling, around any casings or baseboards that I might have. Now as I work along this edge next to the shelf, I want to keep as little paint here as I can. In other words, I don't want it to pool. If it pools, it's going to tend to want to wick underneath that tape onto the trim. So I'll try to keep it as thin as possible. Notice one thing I do here to prevent that pooling of paint is I unload my brush just above that line, get most of the paint off of it, and then I'll just feather that down into that corner to get good coverage. Again, making my final strokes into the wet paint that I painted previously. Now let's talk about inside corners. Now there's probably lots of ways you could do this. Probably use the same techniques I've been using. Go in and very carefully cut each side in. But like I said, I'm all about getting your painting done fast. So the way I do these is first I paint both sides of the corner just pretty quickly. Just get some paint up in there. I'm not being real careful about either side of the corner at this point. And now I'll go back and clean it up. Again, using that angled brush, I'll put the point into one side of the corner and carefully draw the brush down, keeping the point right in the corner. And then do the same on the other. And last, I'll go back and feather out the edges. Now I need to work around this trim, and I do this exactly like I handled the ceiling, cutting it in with the edge of the brush. Like I mentioned before, I removed most of the baseboards as part of the flooring project I'm doing. But here in the kitchen with this tile floor, I'm not removing the baseboards here. There's a couple ways you can handle baseboards. You can do exactly like I've been doing and just cut in along the edge, or this is one place you may want to run some masking tape. And the reason for that is, when you roll out the wall, the splatter from the roller may get onto your baseboards. So you have to decide what you want to do there. If you do decide to mask, usually the only thing you need to worry about is the top edge, and then just wrap the tape around the detail portion, and the splatter usually won't get onto this lower portion. For me, I'm just going to go ahead and cut it in like I've been doing everywhere else and skip the masking. The last bit of cutting in I need to do is around any of the plugs and light switches on the wall. And this is really easy. I just work around both sides, top and bottom. And then I just go back and feather the paint out and get all my brush strokes going one direction. So now I've got everything cut in, and at this point it's a good idea to let the paint dry, especially if this is the first coat you've put down. You'll need to let it dry to see how well it covered. Now I've already painted a good part of the basement, and I know that I'm getting away with one coat of paint, which is great. So I'm going to move right into the rolling now and get this done. To roll paint, I'll take my roller cover and install it onto the frame. I'll place it in my pan. I want to be careful that I don't get any dirt or debris on this because it'll transfer it right to the wall. Now let me show you another trick you can use. Like I said, I've already been painting this same color here in the basement. So I have a roller that I used previously. I last painted with it 2 nights ago. To keep these fresh and be able to reuse them, I place it inside a plastic bag and then put it in the refrigerator. And I've been able to save rollers this way for actually a couple of weeks. This will save you a lot of money in rollers, not having to replace it between coats. Before I get started with the rolling, let's talk about the roller covers a little more as well. These come in various thicknesses of what they call nap, or that's the cloth on the roller itself. Generally, a 3/8 nap roller is what you'll want to use for your walls. 1/2 inch is also used, although I more commonly use the 1/2 inch nap on ceilings and 3/8 on the walls. The longer the nap, the more texture will be left on the wall. Another handy tool to have is one of these small rollers. If I remember right, these are 4 inches. And these are great for getting into small corners and areas that you can't get with the big roller. This smaller roller will be useful on some of these tighter areas on my walls, such as between this plug and the corner. So I'll add some paint to my tray. And now we can get started rolling. So the first thing I need to do now is load the roller with some paint. And that's very similar to loading the brush. I want a good, consistent, generous amount of paint on the roller. That looks good. Now I can transfer it to the wall. I want to apply the paint consistently. The way I like to do it is I work in about 3-foot sections, doing the top half of the wall and then the lower half, and then I'll blend the two together. I'll start kind of in the middle of the wall, and this disperses the excess paint out of the roller. And then I'll work that out to the edges. As I come to the ceiling and to the floor, I want to be careful that I don't touch the roller against either one. Spread the paint across the wall, getting a nice even coat. And now I'll do the same thing on the bottom half of the wall. Okay, now I need to blend everything out, getting rid of any lines and blending the top half and the bottom half. To do that, I like to start at the top of the wall and work all the way to the bottom in one stroke. The other thing I'm going to do is feather the roller. In other words, I'm going to apply a little more force to one side than the other. I'll show you why in a second. On these next passes is where the feathering becomes important. I've actually left a pretty good line right there. And by feathering, in other words, I'm applying more pressure to this side of the roller than this side, it's going to get rid of that line. And I do that technique all the way across the wall. Now I need to do the short end wall. For this, I've loaded the roller with just a small amount of paint. I'll work down the end wall, getting a good coverage of paint on it, and then worry about the edge. I want to make sure that I don't have excess paint on that edge that's going to run. Also, in this case, I'm changing colors between the end wall and this side wall. So I want to keep as crisp of an edge as I can right here. And again, I can do that by feathering. I'm applying very little force to the roller at this point because I don't want to press that paint onto those edges. Again, all the way from bottom to top, and I'll give it one more from top to bottom to even it out. And I'll continue on with these same techniques around the room. And here's that spot where the small roller will make this easier. So there's a few tips and techniques that I hope will make your painting project a little easier and a little faster. Thanks for watching.